So we're just gonna, I saw that there were some people sending in some questions on the Google Doc. We have 15 minutes for questions, so you guys can type away. If you have not access to the Google Doc, I believe it, Luis, correct me if I'm wrong, it's jonthebeach.com/Gromenauer -doc. Yeah, that was easy.
Should I put it on this slide?
Yeah, there's a lot of developers in the room, so it'll be okay. So, Sergey, we have a few questions here. Let me just scroll down. And wow, people are still typing away.
Sure.
Are you ready to go?
Yeah.
Yeah? Perfect. So one of the questions that we have here is, how much has Erlang or OTP inspired the Orleans architecture?
It's a great question. So when we started in the late 2008 or early 2009, so the problem was how to build the programming model that would make single machine developers productive in distributed space, in the cloud services space. And one of the original ideas was to use use actor model, and we'll look at Erlang, look at how things are done. So we sort of borrowed some of these ideas, but we approach it differently. So we introduced what eventually we called virtual actor model, where instead of creating actors explicitly, you just get this identity, user identity to get a reference to the actor, and then you call it, and that's it. You don't have to instantiate them. So it's kind of, I think we build on top of the Erlang ideas. It's kind of standing on shoulders of giants.
And you did touch on some of those examples during your talk, so that makes perfect sense. Okay, we got some more. Anonymous Leopard is coming in. All right, so the second question that we have here is, how is Orleans doing in terms of adoption?
So the problem with open source is, how do you know? How do you measure? To be honest, we don't know how to measure it. So adoption in some way is limited because of .NET. And I mean, we know that .NET ecosystem is still smaller than JVM. Hopefully with .NET Core, that's going to change, and there'll be more adoption. But the problem is how to measure it. And I ask people that work in Azure, can you query like across Azure VMs and find how many of them use Orleans? They deal and say, no, we cannot do it. There are all these constraints and all we can do. Like my boss was on the business trip in Israel, and somebody approached him and said, hey, we're using Orleans for 2 years. We do some financial modeling. We've never heard of them. So they just pull the sources, like use the code, get packages from GitHub, NuGet. I don't know.
Do you guys ever, because you have open source, this is all open source and it is all on GitHub, I'm assuming that you guys also take in considerations or use cases that are presented by users?
Oh, absolutely. They contribute, like I said, the bug reports, fixes, features, ideas, discussions. Yes. So that's one of the kind of gauges. We see the growing number of people in the community that come and then contribute and ask questions. So definitely see the, kind of the growth. And we see the downloads from NuGet are growing, but then it caches, and it's hard to be precise there or even close to reality if you don't charge money.
All right, let me find another good one here, because there's a bunch coming in. Okay, so how does it compare with Foundation DB transactions or Datomic transactions?
I don't know. I can't say anything about those.
All right.
Sorry.
Well, okay. So here's a question, and you can tell us if this sounds right to you. It's, doesn't Orleans, or does Orleans need a centralized transaction manager to build the transaction dependencies graph? Right,
so that's the original design. That's why I talk about version 1, version 2. In version 1, there is a single transaction manager that resolves all the dependencies. But in version 2, that's partitioned.
That was my question, sorry. Don't you still need a centralized sort of component in order to maintain the same isolation level as you had before when you had the dependency graph?
We don't, because that transaction manager piece, he still talks, he understands the state and the transaction state of those other grains involved and their logs. So it's enough for it to be associated with the grain that started transaction. Yeah, we can talk offline.
All right, so it sounds like you're going to have a couple of people come up to you after this. All right, the doc is still open. There's still some things coming in. So let me see if I can, if the person's in the audience and they can correct me on this question if I'm saying it right, is it possible to do a transaction between a storage and queue? It says at least one message.
Yeah, at least once or exactly once?
How can you do a message just once?
No, to make sure that it will arrive to the other actor.
Oh, from one, okay. So how can you make sure that the message will arrive to the other actor in just one go?
In general, there is no such goal for us. So we try to achieve at least once, but we don't guarantee exactly. Sorry, I put it differently. So we deliver it at most once. So we don't try to be at least once. We started early on, we tried to do that, and you have to maintain too much state. And when there are failures, when there's like network or server failures, so you start to kind of retry storm because you try to deliver, and that was detrimental to stability of the system. And in the end, I think the problem is at the runtime level, we don't know which calls are important and should be retried, and which is just, I'm trying to log something and I'm okay if it doesn't get there. So we leave it to the application, so we bubble the failure and the application can retry. So this is where we settled a few years ago.
This question is a little bit broader, I think. It's, or maybe you can make them a little bit more specific, but what are the main differences between Microsoft Service Fabric and Orleans? Okay,
so there's a lot of confusion. I get this question quite a bit. So Service Fabric is primarily about orchestrating microservice applications. So it does deployment, upgrades, it maintains the cluster. But as part of that offering, and now it also manages containers, orchestrates containers, just like Kubernetes. But in addition to that, it has programming models for stateful services, stateless services. It includes a replicated storage solution called like reliable collections. And one of those pieces is the actor model implementation. The big difference with Orleans is that the goal was different for these reliable actors. The goal there was to highlight these services of a service fabric, like replicated storage. So they can only run with Service Fabric. The goal of Orleans is very different. So Orleans can run anywhere you want, say the way you want. So it can run in Service Fabric, it can run on AWS, it can run on premises, anywhere. So there are different goals generally between Service Fabric and Orleans.
So how would you, or what would be the differentiator with you recommending somebody to use Orleans or Service Fabric?
So it's not either or, but we have a large number of customers that run Orleans on Service Fabric. So use Service Fabric to deploy microservices built with Orleans and manage them with upgrade and everything, the monitoring.
All right. Just to break the ice a little bit, there's a when, in bold and with a smiley face, is when are you moving to Malaga with your family?
I should probably ask my wife there. I'll defer to her.
No comment.
Not yet.
All right.
We're working on it.
Anonymous Dragon is writing something in, but maybe there's somebody who's writing in a question. Do you want to just raise your hand? I'll be happy to repeat so that everybody can hear.
Is Orleans used as a Microsoft product?
So is it embedded in a Microsoft product or?
If there is some Microsoft product used in Orleans.
Okay, so the question is for everybody is, are there any Microsoft products using Orleans currently?
Oh yeah, of course. There's a large number of them. And sort of they started using before it was even publicly available or no, and went in production in late 2011. And I think this association between Orleans and Halo started then, even though Orleans was not built for gaming, but because Halo was the first team that came, hey, we want to be in production in 3 months, let's do it. And they went and succeeded, and everything worked. And then there were many other services, like within Azure and Skype used it, some AI teams. But Rebecca has a question.
Was Orleans open source from the beginning, or did you have to make the arguments at Microsoft to make it open source?
So to repeat, I'm just going to repeat the question for everybody. Was Orleans open source from the beginning, or did Sergey have to basically fight with everybody at Microsoft to get it to be open source?
It wasn't open source from the beginning, because when we started, there was no such thing. Like open source was viewed very skeptically and kind of as a threat. But we open sourced I believe in January 2015. And to get to that point, yeah, it took a lot of convincing. I wouldn't say fight, but to convince quite a number of people of the benefits. And now those benefits are paying off because people see that there's contributions, the quality is higher because people find problems that we wouldn't see. We can hire people from the community that if somebody has a track record of contributing and showing high quality work, that's much better than your interview loop. So now it's easier and there's a lot more getting open source.
So it's also easier within your organization to pitch more open source projects because of this?
That contributes. Our experience contributes because there is a very vibrant community and everyone is happy and they see the benefits.
Let me see if there's, so how does, I think it's a pretty specific question, is how does a distributed TM handle rollbacks?
There are no rollbacks, there are aborts, right? So a transaction can commit or it can abort. So you can have, in some rare cases, cascading aborts, but that's part of the protocol. That's kind of normal. You try to transfer money and operation failed, so you get an error back. So there's nothing, you cannot roll back to the previous state arbitrarily. So your operation either succeeds or it fails. I don't know if that answered the question. Well, you can catch me after.
All right. I think we have time for one more question. So is that you raising your hand in the back?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. So
Oh, no.
Luis, please,
yeah.
question.
I just went outside, so I didn't hear anything about when are you moving here to Malaga. So I'm going to ask the person who might answer.
I'm not prepared. Sorry. I mean, I'm not prepared to answer this question. It's just popped up. So I love Malaga. It's first time here, and I love everything. And who knows? Maybe soon we'll move. Thank you.
Yeah, I tried to bring them last year. It didn't work out because of school. So we pulled our son out of school this time to be able to come to Malaga. Said, okay, we'll homeschool for a couple of months. Malaga is worth it.
So it sounds like the answer to Malaga is a maybe, which is good. At minimum, we'll come back next year, right?
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
All right, all right. So Sergey, thank you so much for us. I'd like to thank you on the behalf of Jay on the Beach and Yes We Tech for coming and sharing all of this information with our great audience that we have today. I think Sergey definitely deserves a really big round of applause, a couple of whistles.
Thank you.
And I'll let everybody enjoy a tiny bit of the sunshine until the next talk. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sergey. It's really great.
Oh, hope so.